Our panel discussion today is going to be monitored by the great Professor Ballinger. Thank you.
The great. I won an award once. I want to reintroduce also, in case you weren't here earlier, Jeff Gottlieb, who works for the LA Times and worked on the Bell story. His partner in that story is Ruben Nieves, who's on deadline, so he's working right there, and if he gets it finished, he will join us on stage. And Don Bartletti, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer, and they both gave us fantastic presentations this morning. I want to start by thanking you all for coming and telling you that I'm thrilled to be able to talk with you today. In fact, I'm going to take a picture of you.
Am I in it?
Yes, you are.
So we have a pro here.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry to offend you, Dawn. Now I can put it on Facebook, you know, as with the big shots. So I think the way that I want to start is so that you can all get familiar with their work. I do notice the crowd's a little smaller here. It appears that people came and ate and left. And it's kind of like journalists. You just show up for the food, and, you know. If there's no story, you go home. But I think hopefully people will wander in as classes let out. So what I'd like to do is ask you each to talk a little bit and tell us what you're working on now, so that introduce yourself to the audience in that way. And since we haven't heard from Julie and Tammy, I'd like one of you two to start, please.
Sure.
I'm an environmental reporter, and I have the obscure title of the public lands writer, and lest your eyes glaze over, I cover the national park system, which is pretty cool, but also BLM, public lands, government, federal land in California, and that's 47% of our state and the West. I've been working for quite some time on a project that's now rolling out in the paper. I'm looking at utility-scale solar development in the Mojave. Big, 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 the largest solar plants in the world that could eventually cover 21 million acres. And it's a wonderful example of, I hope it is a good example of counterintuitive thinking. A lot of the work that will come out takes a look at the environmental footprint of these projects, which is pretty heavy. They take a lot of space, they take a lot of water, they displace a lot of endangered species and sensitive plants, and as is the case with anything you do in the desert, once you scrape that thing called the cryptobiotic crust, if you've ever hiked in the desert and it's kind of crunchy, it's a very, very important colony of little creepy crawlies and biomatter that's really important to the desert. Anyway, once that stuff gets done, it's over with. So if you want to look online, you can read the stories, but you could also get a good look at what our lives are like. I'm being pilloried by the environmental community, by the companies who are doing this, by the Secretary of Interior, people who are, think that I'm trying to destroy renewable energy, which of course I'm not, but my job is to look at what's happening and just sort of peel the layer back and examine it. So that's what I've been doing, similar to the fire stuff, reporting it for a while, and it's now every week we're going to roll out a different story. So it's fun to finally have things get in the paper and online rather than just in reporting hell.
Tammy?
Hey, my name's Tammy. I'm actually a recent addition to KPCC. We're pretty aggressively expanding at this moment. You might know that we, not in addition to radio, we've launched these online sections and these teams, and so I cover education for them. And I've been with them for several months. They just started doing this online expansion, and I write for a blog, my blog, Pass Fail. And on that, we've been able to break a fair bit of news recently. I think all of you have probably heard of the Miramonte teacher accusations, the scandals at this school and other schools. It's almost a daily, weekly occurrence now. And through some recent reporting, we were able to uncover that the district had settled with the teacher, with one of the teachers accused of lewd acts on children for $40,000. That they'd paid him that amount of money so that he would resign. We've also been able to determine that the district didn't report or failed to report in a timely fashion that this teacher had accusations against him. And the district ended up saying that they broke the law and that they'd be launching an investigation into the lack of reports or the lack of timely reports. So there's a lot of interesting things there, but that's by no means the only thing that I've been covering. I just finished up a story on redistricting the different school board. The different school board districts need to be changed every 10 years. And this process is ongoing right now. But because of all the different issues that LAUSD has been hit with, few people have been paying much attention. But it's really important because this is what people's districts are going to look like for the next 10 years. And this is what they're going to have to live with. And it's going to affect the decisions that come down the pipeline for their children, and how money is allocated and how politics is done. So yeah.
Thank you. Don or Jeff, do you want to jump in?
I'm on a new beat called Weddings, Bar Mitzvahs, and Circumcisions. Finally. Rich Morosi and I are going to continue working along the border on a series of articles about the impacts of deportation. ICE officers and Border Patrol officers have become extraordinarily efficient at rounding people up, deporting them, and the ability to recross the border again has diminished dramatically in the last few years. So there's a large number of families that have been separated, many men who are stuck on the south side of the border right up against the fence or in abandoned hotels or parks. So that's another aspect of the long-running story that's important for you to know. And the demand of the internet is requiring, and I agree with it, to use video, audio, and still pictures for presentations on the website. Those are very demanding skills. So we're building in a lot of time. There'll be a few stories, maybe 5 or 6 this year, but they'll all be accompanied by a presentation on the internet, which is mercifully a wonderful forum for photography because you get sound, motion, and high-resolution images. So that's coming up, in addition to many other subjects. And the menu in the newspaper is huge, and I don't only shoot the border. And it may be a good thing because I don't want to get burned out on it. It's been my favorite beat for the last 30 years. Being a San Diego County resident, it's not someplace I parachute into, but I live near it, and I want to cover it. But other stories like Hollywood and sports figures and feature stories that I work with writers and reporters on are always entertaining and wonderful and enriching for me to do. Okay.
Thanks.
I, doing a variety of things, my alleged beat is supposed to be municipal corruption. I've got a story coming out on El Segundo. I still have my head in Bell, and looking at some places in that area. I'm involved in a project we're doing on city attorneys. And let's see, what did I have? Recently I did a story about a bunch of nonprofits that got ripped off. And that's what I'm looking at. And if I don't write a story soon where I can sort of exercise my writing muscles, I may have a breakdown, so.
Thank you. And Ruben is working on something as we speak. I think it's secret.
You'll see it in tomorrow morning's front page.
Okay. Oh, front page, really?
Or probably earlier today, later,
On the web.
sometime on the web,
Okay.
yeah.
Someone check, see if it's up yet.
Now wait, the front page deadline's already passed.
Let's see. He's right on it. He's right on it.
That's why he's so busy. Okay, we got it. So the theme of this panel is described as sort of the long and the short of it, and the class that put this together is quite interested in looking at the questions of long-form journalism versus short-form journalism. And I would guess that by definition, prize-winning stories tend to be long-form journalism that go more in depth and spend more time on topics. But I'd like if you each would to sort of comment on your thoughts about long versus short, if you're doing both, if you have a preference. So jump right in.
Yeah, I think that it's a real luxury for any staff to have people who do simply long form, especially today. You know, we're a company that's in bankruptcy. You know, we all look at our BlackBerries to see if we've been laid off. So, you know, the idea that you can lounge around and say, you know, I think I need to go to Paris to just soak in the Seine, and, you know, it just doesn't happen anymore. We used to do it, and we were famous for it at the LA Times, but it just doesn't happen. And I kind of consider it being ambidextrous. It's just what Jeff was saying. You do, can take a long time, but you do need to keep short things. You need to be in the paper. We still speak of the paper, but it, you know, whatever platform, we need to produce stuff. We're very aware of that. That's just an economic imperative. But also you want to, we know from being on beats that the way you get information, the way stories are generated is by writing. So Tammy's working, even now, on her education stuff. When this story gets posted, people will say, hey, you know, you don't know the half of it, you dummy, and they'll send her information, and the more you're in the paper, the more you can be in the paper.
Just on an email.
So it's important to do both, but for my part, I like middle-term things. I like to take a bit more time than we're usually given. It's just, you can sink your teeth into stuff, tell different stories, but you have to justify them. Someone's going to say, why in the world does anyone read, you know, 2,000 words, 60 inches on something, we would say. So it's nice to be able to do both, but I think the ability to do that exclusively in writing that long form, there's precious few people. There's a few, but it's really, you don't do that unless you're in a magazine or at a very large paper that can accommodate someone to do that, I think.
Thank you. Jim.
Well, you know, I much prefer writing longer stories. And I say that, and it is so much harder.
Yeah.
And because when you're writing a bunch of short stories, you write the story and you are done and you go home and that is it. You write the longer stories, you're sleeping with these things, it's driving you crazy. By the time you write it, you're sick of it. Yeah. But you know, it's interesting to talk about this. Well, and often what I think happens is as newspapers, we will write incremental stories. By incremental, you know, different event, this happens and this happens, you know, you write them each individually. Then either the New York Times comes in, or the Wall Street Journal, or the New Yorker, or Vanity Fair come in, and they turn it into a story. You know, once upon a time, and they all lived happily ever after. And, well, they usually don't. And it makes more sense to a reader, oftentimes, I think, when it's all put together like that. And I think as a newspaper, we should do a better job of doing both, the incremental and writing the broader picture. And when the Bell stories came up, this became an interesting an issue, especially at the beginning, because what the LA Times is famous for, as I said in the last session, was we do the, you know, take 6 months on a story and do a 3-part series that you know, starts on the front page, goes to 2 open pages inside. But on the Bell, we sort of, and editors have talked about this, come up with a new template where we just like, we found something, boom, hit it in the paper, boom, boom, boom. And in this case, as I look back, I think it was the right way to do it. It built momentum, in momentum unlike anything I have ever worked on, where it became, in this case, almost like a soap opera, where people every day were picking up their papers and wondering, okay, what did these guys in Bell do now? And Reuben and Jeff became the good guys, and the guys in Bell were the bad guys. And it was a very un-LA Times way of doing things. And I think to some extent it has changed sometimes the way we do things. But given my choice, I would rather sort of kill myself and drive myself crazy and write the longer pieces.
Yeah, I want to agree that sometimes the work, in spite of its enjoyable outcome, having it published or on the website, can consume my thoughts, my dreams. The long-form story version for a visual journalist is the web production. And to come up with a story arc after I get back to the paper after a week or two somewhere, to have hundreds of still pictures, dozens of audio files, dozens of video files, to label them, organize them, and then have to think like a reporter, which is something that was never demanded of photographers for all the way up to a few years ago. We would turn in a pile of pictures and then somebody else would take over. A designer would make the page, an editor would choose the best pictures. Now I'm thinking like these guys. Now, what beginning is going to get the attention of the casual user who has certainly enough distractions on that website to choose something else? So if their attention isn't held within the first 10 or 15 seconds or less, chances are they'll click off it. And there's been research done on this. So to find a dramatic beginning is important, and then to advance the story, there are interfaces, there are sequences, there are transitions, there's toning of the pictures, so you don't change from one stark, dark picture to a white one, or one with high key. And working with Final Cut Express or Final Cut Pro, which is a software that enables you to make a story like Warhorse or a 3-minute video on the LA Times website. It's a phenomenally powerful tool to use that has a big learning curve. So the long-form story is on the internet for me. Gone are the days of when the 6-part series Enrique's Journey was published in 2003, where we took 6 days to run the story, 63 pictures. We transferred contracts for advertisements and postponed them. We had 5 or 6 open pages every day. Those resources were enormously expensive. The story and the photo essays were worth running, and we republished it in a separate volume on top of that. Those days are not around anymore, but the internet has now replaced it. Is my favorite forum of expression. So that's where I am.
I want to say one quick thing. For writers, we thought, oh, the web, how wonderful it is going to be receiving so many of our wonderful words. We thought that as the space in the paper shrank, that we could just unload any our huge, long, very important, beautifully written pieces onto the web because it has infinite space. And it's been quite the opposite. We've, again, through understanding of how people use the internet and use our webpage, people don't want to read long stories on the web at all, despite the space. And the paper now is the place where we put that, and everything on the web is like this. Whereas I think for photojournalists, it's been very cool for you guys because they put up these galleries and they can stay there, and it's been a really great thing for photojournalists. I think for us, it's not that it's bad, it's the opposite. We thought that the internet would be where all this long-form journalism would find a home, and I think it's quite the opposite. The paper now is becoming a bit more select, and we'll have these longer pieces. There are a lot of projections of what a newspaper will look like. Will it be more like a magazine? It will have a lot of opinion, sports columns, and longer pieces, and the web page will have all of our breaking news, and you'll charge a lot more, a couple $3 for the newspaper, and there's all this stuff. But as far as long form versus short form, it's been the opposite of what everyone expected it to be. So it's been very interesting in that way. Tim.
So I think I have a pretty interesting perspective in that I was at the Times, I started the Times about 6 years ago, and when I was there, people were still doing these really long pieces. And I was there for a few years, and then I ended up moving from there. The next place I ended up working at was the AP, where there is no paper. So, and when I was at the Times, it went from, in 3 years, it went from long pieces to several long pieces here and there, but a focus on getting things out quickly and getting things online. There was a major transformation, and I think the Times has come into its own over the last couple of years and really has the online presence and is growing there. At the AP, they do quick hits, quick updates. You're trying to get the news out. You're trying to churn it out, let people know what's going on. They do longer form, but fewer and far between on a daily basis. And so it's sort of the middle ground, I think, or I feel, between a newspaper and a purely online operation. That said, I much prefer writing longer, being able to take the time to look into something, put pieces together, think about it, take the reader along a journey. Even though there's tons of space online, as Julie just said, you can't just throw people information because you have the space. That said, I think there's plenty of room for long developed stories. The New York Times does a great job of it in their magazines sections. They'll go into one subject and they'll have 9 or 10 pages. And those stories are often the most emailed stories out there because they really take the time to take the reader through this subject. And I feel like online, you have to really respect the reader and really respect their time. And if you're giving them quality content, they will read it. But if you're just throwing it out there to make yourself feel better about the information that you wrote down and putting it there because you have it, they're not going to read it. It's a waste of their time. It's a waste of space. So I think that what Jeff was talking about, the way that the Bell story was reported, quick hits, that often works very well online also, works very well with social media. You build a momentum. But then I think that even if you're purely online, there's plenty of space to take these little quick hits and web them together into a what does this mean story. And if you are online, you can just hyperlink people over to the details. So the put it together story doesn't necessarily need to spell out every detail that's been covered already. You can summarize, and there's a lot of different ways that you can use that online ability to your benefit to tell a better story, to inform readers without overloading them.
Thank you. Julie, when you mentioned, I remember that conversation that, the web is going to long form. There's so much room. We don't have to pay for newsprint, right? And it didn't turn out that way. And a phenomenon I've noticed is that when people are tweeting or sharing on Facebook, or even sending me an email to reference a story, friends or acquaintances, they will often apologize because it's long. This is long, but it's worth it. Have you guys seen this? Yeah. Okay. So they warn you that it's a long story, which I find very interesting. So I'm wondering what you think, Julie, and the others, and Tammy, you addressed this a little bit, but do you think the lower interest in long form on the internet, is that an audience-driven thing? Is it because the audience primarily really isn't interested in reading long stories?
I don't think, as far as news sites are concerned, we figured out what our audience is, what they want. We are in an arrogant profession. We are accustomed to saying, here it is. We lead you around through various conventions on a front page. You know what the most important story is. We know how your eye travels, and we're telling you, we're the gatekeepers. That's how we're trained. So we're in charge, we're the boss. And if we didn't cover it, it didn't happen, and that's how we all grew up and we were raised. And there's a big democracy out there called the web, and so it's harder to tell people what's important. Every time you see a story on the LA Times webpage about Lindsay Lohan, I know why it's there. I'm not sure that's the most newsworthy story of the day, but it sure as hell going to get a lot of hits. So we've had to become more democratic, less authoritative, that's not the right word, less bossy. We've catered to an audience, trying not to pander to an audience. So it's been very interesting. You're right, long stories. I think, especially what you were talking about, Tammy, it's context is what very often what we provide. You write Bell incrementally and say, these guys, you know, basically they're corrupt, they're taking all this money, they're bankrupting this town of these poor people, and it's iteration, iteration. Then Vanity Fair comes in and we say from 35,000 feet, meaning they fly in, they look down and they say, behold, you know, Bell. But what those types of stories provide is a context. We know you've been reading all this stuff in little bits, and what we're going to, for purposes of our conversation, we'll call the long story. That will be the one, you know what, here's the whole thing with hyperlinks and all that, but you need at some point to pull back and say, this is important, here's why, here's the context for it, here's an historical look at it, or whatever you need, you know, look forward, we always say advance the story, who's going to go to prison, and there's an appetite for that online, but it's, I think, the day of journalists saying, you know, we know what's right and what we say is important. I still think that's right, of course. But I mean, as far as determining what news is and driving that on our websites, it's so interactive now. We are reacting to what people want. And a lot of us, the older people, I'm looking this way, of course, we don't like it because I don't want someone, you know, I know what would get a lot of hits. We could be a British tabloid and have bare breasts on page 2 when you know, open it up, and then there's a story about a puppy, and then there's a story about a nun, and people are going to pick that up every day and read it. It's very interesting, but I don't want to work in that profession, so you got to have everything, and you know, so my roundabout way. See, this is why I like the long form too. Things are changing, and it's good for us to not be so hidebound and be a bit more democratic and listen a bit more to our readers. But we have to find, you know, we're still the ones who are trained to bring this to you, and sometimes we just have to do it.
Well, we've learned that the web needs to be changed every 20 minutes because people who sign on to it when they get to the office and then they check it out again at noon and then before they go to bed, don't want to see it look the same. That researchers have determined. So that's why you'll see a Lindsay Lohan walking into court, a photo, and then you might see a picture of the presidential candidate in the afternoon and so forth. So it keeps changing.
Lindsay Lohan walking out of court.
Yeah, then are walking out of court. But and another interesting detail we've learned from visitors to the web is they don't want to watch a video that's more than 3 minutes. 3 minutes seems to be like the soundbite they can stand the most. So you may have noticed on some videos that you've seen, there's a little second clock that ticks down, 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 down. Well, I will admit that when I go on New York Times website or Washington Post and I see their videos, I immediately look down, now how long is this going to take me? And this better be damn good, or I'm not going to sit here 4 minutes. Jesus. So I'm going to suggest that we don't have that on there. You just watch it, and if you get sick of it, then you click off it. One thing I want to mention is what got me interested in accepting this invitation to the conference was Ryan said that we might be titling this "The Importance of Newspapers in the Digital Age." Well, I find that in my second job of commuting, I'm listening to the radio, squawk radio, all the time. I don't listen to much music, but I'm very interested in both sides of the talk radio debate across the airwaves. I am shocked at how many radio stations and TV stations and filmmakers and look to the LA Times and other newspapers as their menu for their day's show. I mean, I've heard Bill Handel on KFI in the morning. I swear to God, it's this far from plagiarism. He'll be reading the story like he got that quote. And then, oh yeah, how about, what's the latest big scandal about the molestations? My God, if they didn't have the LA Times, they wouldn't have a show. And there have been many Hollywood movies made about Enrique's journey. Many public broadcasting stations called me and harangued me for all of my sources. Was it dangerous? How'd you get there? How'd you do that? How long would it take? Blah, blah, blah. Should I be able to do it? And when the CBC called me and says, we've been thinking about doing a story of kids on the trains for, a long time. So we just need, a name of somebody else. I says, well, you've been thinking about it for a long time? Well, I did it 3 years ago. Why haven't you done it yet? Well, the importance of newspapers across a wide spectrum of communication is invaluable. And I know once information is in the public domain, it really is fair game. But I think John and Ken should say, instead of lambasting the LA Times, should say, according to Jeff Gottlieb, instead of, well, the LA Times said, and then Ken will say, and then they'll continue to read our website as if they are the journalists. A pet peeve of mine. And
But that what you're talking about us still setting the agenda, for news. I mean, that goes back in God, the 60s. You guys don't even know who Walter Cronkite was, probably. The most trusted man in America, who was the CBS anchorman. And Walter Cronkite used to say that, people need to read the newspaper, that on the evening news, you can read a quarter of the New York Times front page, or half. It was something like that. And still, I think, and I very seldom watch evening news because I'm usually working or dealing with my kid. But, most of their stories are stories that come out of the newspaper.
Yeah, I see that all the time as well. Did you want to jump into that, Tammy?
Well, I don't want to get into the whole radio newspaper debate here that you guys are having, but I will say that, I grew up in LA, and the LA Times was my paper of record, and I think that for a lot of people, it definitely sets the agenda of what's discussed out there on the radio waves. KPCC specifically has been trying to do its own original reporting for use on its shows, but LA Times definitely a big factor in the reporting we do as well, and as it should be. I think there's plenty of news out there, and LA's a big town, and the more people reporting the news and holding people accountable and putting the stories out there, the better. I always feel that the more reporters on a subject, that's not a bad thing. Competition is good, and for a long time, the city hasn't had that many news outlets going after people, making sure that what's happening out there is right, is being done properly. I did want to say one thing about the question that you brought up about whether it was whether it was audience driven, I suppose. Right. I think that the audience. So I think the question was whether it's audience driven that people come and pop over for a short story and maybe not the longer ones. I think that the audience actually really hungers for something substantive on a subject. Often you get these, I call it kind of popcorn or chips, and you just like popping Pringles in your mouth. You have this, this little bit on Miramonte, you have this little bit on this other teacher, this little bit, and everyone knows that, oh, LAUSD, it's crazy, all these scandals every day. But no one puts it together and says, why does this matter? No one gives that analysis or kind of puts a perspective on it. And I think that that's what a reporter, in addition to providing the chips, they should provide the full meal for people too. So I don't believe that there isn't an audience out there that wants that. To the contrary, I think that when you do that, and when we provided that context, a lot of people have been very interested in our social media numbers usually spike when there's something that can tie things together that isn't what is being reported out there, isn't the same story that TV and radio and all the different newspapers that they've already reported and they continue to report. Finding a new angle and new information that will shed some light on an issue in a better way, I think is part of what we do. And I think that it doesn't matter how long or short that story is ultimately, as long as the content's good.
Thanks. One of the reasons I'm so happy about doing this panel is I get most of my news from LA Times and KPCC, so I'm getting a lot of good info. I wanted to ask you about social media. You just mentioned it, Tammy, and ask the rest of you as well. Are you using social media for your stories or to make connections with readers? Something I've noticed is I follow Nicholas Kristof, and I'd followed him on Twitter and then realized he was on Facebook, and he does a very interesting thing on Facebook. It's half PR, a little bit, because he'll say, I'm about to interview someone, you got any questions? Which is really engaging the reader, and I'm seeing more and more journalists are doing this. Are you doing anything like this, and or what do you think of it, if you aren't?
God, I can tell you, I would not ask people, say, what are your questions? I mean, look, what I do, I'm a professional, I know how to do this, and I'm not saying that to denigrate what other people think, I mean, it's like my whole argument, people talk about citizen journalism, they can do what we can. Well, they can't. It's just like I couldn't go to court and be a lawyer. I would not ask people, say, what questions do you have? Because I think I can figure that out by myself, and asking other people too. I don't use Facebook. I mean, I might use Facebook in the sense to track people down and that kind of thing, but I don't do it to engage readers. Where we will really be using social media, and I can think of an example. For example, when the Bell trial happens, in the old days, a trial would happen, you would, anything happens, you go to the paper, you write your story, it shows up in the paper the next day. What's going to happen? We're going to be tweeting it. We're going to be putting on a Facebook. We're going to be putting on our website. Then we're, writing a story. That's where that'll come. But I don't use social media a lot to engage people.
I just want to go back to black and white film. Social media is something I've tried. I did get a Facebook account, but I ended up just putting my favorite pictures that weren't in the paper on that. But now I get millions of buzzes on my BlackBerry every day, and it's, some is about, well, somebody has commented about your picture, or it's somebody's goddamn birthday. How many blogs and how many of these things can you use in a day? So my forum remains the Times, but yeah, Facebook is, we actually do have a social media expert now at the Times. That's his job, and we get there are sessions every week.
Every Wednesday.
Yeah, every Wednesday. I should probably go to that, because there's probably something about it that would do me some good. And all of you were born into the age of social media, or at least you matured into it. You're not that young, but younger than me, let me tell you that. So I don't know, I need to remain open. I don't want to burn out or lose out. But right now, Facebook is like maybe once every 3 weeks I'll go on that thing.
I think there's a difference between using social media as a tool and as a reporting tool, and social media to engage readers, which is fine. That part is good. Again, you're seeing a good dose of the arrogance we have in our business. I'm like, I don't want to hear from readers. Pfft. And because no one bothers to send you an email, or in the old days a letter, and say, you are fabulous.
That's
Thank
not
you
true.
so
That's
much.
not true.
Well, in the old, maybe, but 90%, you are a freaking idiot. They go on and on and on, and you say, Mom, stop it, But so interacting with readers in whatever forum is kind of new for us all, and that's very relevant because we should be doing that. There's the issue of crowdsourcing, which I would never do, ever. And what that is something happens, but I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and then if I were trying to report from Syria or Tahrir Square in Egypt, crowdsourcing is a big deal, Crowdsourcing is when people are tweeting and saying, oh my God, something is happening. You monitor Twitter, or we monitor Twitter and Facebook and say, wow, something's going on, in Pomona, because we're seeing all these tweets. We better go and see what it is. I would be in favor of sending a reporter. I would never base anything on anybody's tweets, and that just has to do with training. All of you guys, if we left the room now and Jane said, please describe all the speakers and tell something about them, I would have blonde hair, because you're not trained to do to do what we do. It doesn't mean we're better, we're just different. And people get things wrong. God knows we get things wrong. So crowdsourcing, using social media to report makes me extremely nervous. And I'm working on something now where I'm going to be quoting a lot from emails. And I got these from public documents, from a file that was given to me. I have no reason to believe they've been redacted or changed or monkeyed with. Our lawyers all over me. How do you know they were sent? Who are they from? Right, because I have, it makes me very, very nervous. If my name is on it and I'm representing the Times and we're responsible for the accuracy of something, so crowdsourcing and social media as a tip is great, but to rely on it for reporting makes me extremely, extremely nervous. Would never do it.
Well, Tammy, you're the only person I could find when I search social media, so I'm suspecting you may have a different perspective.
So yeah, this is something that I'm very involved with social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, what have you. And KPCC is also very involved with social media. We have Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts. We have a social media person. We use Storify on our site when something's breaking. We live tweet meetings. I was at the Cal State University meetings where they were talking about the budget, where students were testifying. I was tweeting out information, and for a lot of people, that's how they were learning about what was going on, what developments, what was being said. For Occupy, when they were trying to take protesters out of the City Hall, the area park around City Hall, when the LAPD was doing that, we had a Storify going on our site with live updates from the field. We had staff tweeting out there. Our staff person was one of the only people of the pool of media allowed to cover the event that was tweeting from within the pool. So they were there watching the police take these people out of there. So we use it quite a bit. I think that what Julie mentioned about relying on it as for a report is, definitely problematic. You don't know who the information's coming from. Often you don't know if it was verified. You don't know if their account was hacked. But using it as a tip sheet is amazing. And often, in the past, I compare it to, people, we have like the wire system, so the AP or a city news service, they file what's going on around the city, and keep an eye on that. You can have a general idea of what things are going on. Well, I treat my Twitter feed the same way, and keyword certain issues that I want to keep an eye on, and there have been many, many things that we're developing where the person said they were going to ask a question but didn't get the story out soon enough, where I was able to jump in and report out a story, and often break some news that might not have gone onto my radar otherwise. I think that I think that social media is also really important for transparency. As a public radio station or a news organization, KPCC really, it's supported by the public, so we have tried to make a real effort to make sure everything we do is as transparent as possible. And so when things happen, like yesterday, the superintendent for LAUSD was at the station and was not talking to the media. He refused to answer questions from our education team about what was going on with the Miramonte teacher scandals, or what they were doing about reporting teachers to the state agency responsible for credentialing. So he came to the station. NBC came to the station. he threatened our people, or threaten's a strong word. He basically said that if NBC came in the building, he would walk out. And then he said that if we asked questions of him, he would leave. So I sent a tweet out that said, Dr. Daisy, superintendent, is refusing to answer KPCC's education team's questions, and says he'll leave if NBC arrived, and he warned that he would leave if they asked him questions. And that message was picked up by a number of people and retweeted, and I incorporated those facts into my story as well. And when I was done, I sent that out. But it gives people an insight into the reporting process and the efforts that you're making on the public's behalf, I think, to get the information, to get their questions answered. And it sort of completes that process of journalism and holding people accountable and providing that information to the public. So that's sort of one example. There's one more example where we were able to, where the LAPD had all of the command structure had their information thrown onto the website. It was public searchable information, but it was like the names of their kids in certain instances, their wives, their houses, their addresses. It is public information, but it's also not information you can easily get. It was all put in one spot by the anonymous, the hacker. I think it's the stock phrase is the shadowy hacker group, international hacker group, and it was put on the website. And initially, they didn't know who put it on the website. We ended up discovering that it was indeed the hacker group. They claimed credit, and because of our conversations with them through Twitter, they ended up we had a chat session with these hackers where we were able to get their side of the story, their reasoning. But again, I mean, that had to be confirmed on multiple levels to ensure that it wasn't some spoof, some random person saying, yeah, I'm a hacker, come talk to me, this is what I did. And so we were able to corroborate that it was indeed them, that they had done that. Our website came under a denial of service attack after we ran our story, and we lost traffic for like half an hour, but we were able to get it back. And
Ruben, the question was, do you use social media or do you have thoughts about social media and journalism?
I do, actually. I got into Twitter, Facebook, obviously. And I've been just hearing some of the stuff about, to me, it seems like when you're using social media, it obviously comes down to common sense. You're gonna see someone tweeting something and you're just like, wow, that stands out. So let me reach out to them. Can you call me? Can you try to initiate something to sort of double check the information as a reporter. I think there are times when Twitter also does come in it serves as a very, very good, useful tool for reporting. I think I was reporting about a traffic accident, something that happened. It wasn't anything huge, but I couldn't get anyone from the CHP office to call me back or even pick up the phone. But yet they were tweeting about it like crazy. And so I'm like, well, then I guess it's an official source, an agency, right? So whatever they're putting out, I'm going to just use that and then also reference that it came from their, from a tweet that they did. So I think it's very useful. It's certainly very useful when, we're writing about someone and they've had this long history of, a session of ranting and that we could use for the story, which is careful what you guys write about. It's useful. Facebook certainly is very useful, at least in stories, when you're looking for a person, you want to get to know more about them, you want to reach out to their friends, their family, relatives. It's just a useful tool, but again, it comes down to common sense. I think you're not just going to put up what someone says or tweets, and I think we've done that a lot with Lindsay Lohan, and that's one of my quirks, by the way, is following celebrities because I just love what they tweet. It's just hilarious stuff. But it's useful, and the only thing I caution is just use it wisely.
For self-defense or as a journalist?
As a journalist.
Oh, okay. I
And
thought you were telling them to
self-defense.
use it wisely, or you might report.
Actually, both,
Okay.
yeah.
We're going to go to questions here in a minute, so start formulating them in your mind. But since you slipped in late, Ruben,
Yeah.
I'd like to catch up because I started the panel by asking everyone to just tell us what they're working on right now. So I was hoping you could give us a scoop on that front page story that's going in tomorrow.
We've been, me and my colleague Jack Dolan, we've sort of been investigating the county assessor's office and for the county here in LA. And we discovered that there was an employee who was being asked to reduce the assessment on, basically reduce property tax on one of, for this tax agent. And the county employee refused and basically quit. And we've been trying to get this guy to go on the record, and we've been just talking to him, and finally he has gone on the record. So tomorrow's paper will say that a county employee who was asked to basically reduce improperly the assessment value of a multi-million-dollar property basically quit his job because he was being forced to do that. And there's allegations of this relationship between a tax agent and the county assessor, which is a huge deal. So it should be a pretty interesting article.
Well, thank you for filling us in. Has anyone tweeted that yet?
No, I don't think it's even up yet. You guys got the scoop already.
It's already out.
See who's my best journalism students here.
Yeah,
Who's
I know.
tweeted that?
Let's
Come
find
on.
out.
I think at this time, we're going to take a little time for questions, so hop up, and we've got a microphone over here. I would be happy to talk, but I would like to hear from you. Mr. Callen.
This is a question for any of you that want to take a stab at it. If you're worthy of Pulitzer awarded tweet, what do you see the characteristics of an ideal series of tweets?
That didn't use the past tense of tweet, right?
There used to be a joke about USA Today. There are always jokes about USA Today, but they haven't won a Pulitzer, and lots of very, very good people haven't won Pulitzers. But we used to say, oh yeah, they won a Pulitzer for best investigative paragraph. But so, you know, somebody else answer that. I have no clue.
God, I mean, well, the problem is in something like that, you know, a story is nothing without context. You know, you throw facts out, they mean nothing. The key paragraphs in a story are the stories that give context. And that's the problem with Twitter. It just, for what it is, it's good, but it just throws it out there. You know, 140 characters, boom. You know, so you really, you can't say anything. You can tease. You know, read this Ruben's story. What could you say? You know, the LA Times has a really interesting story coming more on this, you know, slimy tax assessor. You know, that kind of thing. So you really can't do much on it.
You know, the reason I raise the question is that, I mean, it seems pretty far-fetched, but in literature, I mean, there are these contests, there are these awards for the best 55-word short story, the best 76-word story, the best 150-word story, all that kind of stuff. So I'm wondering,
Yeah, but haiku will convey an emotion or paint a picture of the beautiful stream or whatever it may be. A short poem might do the same thing. When you're charged with conveying information, if you say Obama assassinated, if that's, I mean, that's really, you could write a 1,500-word story and that's the gist. That's a good tweet in terms of conveying information and delivering news. But providing context, giving more information, it's not that useful in the way that you're presenting a scenario to me.
I'll take a quick stab. I think this year was the first year the Pulitzer Committee changed the one of the criteria or one of the categories and said it doesn't have to be printed, it can be online. online journalism can receive a Pulitzer. And I think, I actually do think it's a step, I mean, I think your question is interesting, and I think that while a tweet, 140 characters, is not a place where you can really present much depth to the reader, I think you can tease the reader toward more depth. And I also think that if there were to be a Twitter category, best tweet, I think it would be in the area of breaking news. That would be, and I think that actually it would be it's an excellent way to cover breaking news. If you're out in the field, you're out in Tahrir Square. A reporter that knows what they're doing can convey quick bits of information that are very important without using much. They don't need a computer. I mean, it's like texting. The information gets out there in small packets, and it's and a photo and a caption, which is your tweet, can convey a lot. And to have a series of those, and I believe there was a reporter for I think it was for the New York Times, that was down in the Gulf area during the recent, I think, Hurricane Ike, who did his reporting, used Twitter as his notebook. And there's an interesting article online about that, how when he went back, he said that it conveyed for him the most accurate, on-the-spot, on-the-moment report of what had happened. And so, I mean, I don't think it lends itself to the most in-depth reflective reporting, but I think there's plenty of room for different types of tweets, and that, you know, on a breaking news story, I think it's perfect. You can tweet out the info, tweet out the pictures, you can add in a bit of reflection, and frankly, with all the other information coming in from other news sources, I think having a person there giving an eyewitness is great.
But you know, the Twitter Pulitzer, I mean, what it would mean, I mean, something very, very succinct, you know, which no excess, no nothing. What's the greatest sentence ever written? Jesus wept. Boom. I mean, something like that. So.
Let's have another question.
I was wondering if each of you could speak about your favorite and least favorite part of the job, or versus the favorite aspect of the
So was that the favorite part of your job? Favorite and least favorite part of your jobs, okay. Start us off.
All right. Favorite,
Working with me?
least favorite is working with this guy. Favorite thing is the gotcha moment, the aha moment, where you've done your research, you've investigated, you're put all your information together, you've talked to people, and you go to the source that you're obviously writing about, and you start talking to them, and you start laying out the questions, and then the minute they lie or the minute they said something they weren't supposed to, it's like, aha, gotcha. And that's what I love. Not necessarily for the sake of like, I'm trying to be a bully or anything, but the sake of like, I knew something was wrong and now you've proven it. And thanks. And now I get to write about it and I get to inform the public about it, and not just in a very objective way, and also in a very accurate way, and why this matters. I think that's my favorite thing, and the reward that comes with that is what happens after that, such as in the case of Bell, or maybe now with the assessor stuff, who knows. The least favorite thing, I can't think of anything other than sometimes there are long hours, and those crazy deadlines would drive you nuts. I think it would be that, just, I can't think of anything else. You guys want to?
I would say the least favorite would be two things: dealing with office politics and dealing with editors. And I've been an editor. I would say the favorite part is knowing that what you thought was there is there, and you've proven it. That you got it. I'd say that's the favorite part.
Yeah, the hardest thing for me is also my favorite thing, and that's the web. But the web is now demanding deadlines. So I'd like to spend longer at a news event, but we're required now or asked to ship pictures, transmit pictures quickly. to update the web right away. I'd rather just hang at a story and just find the essence, find the one picture that tells the story. So we're now telling stories in more than one picture. It's like a longer story. And my favorite part of is informing people about something they may not have known about, preserving it for in historical context. I try to archive all of my images and captions so anybody in the future would know where, who, what, where, when, and why it was important. So that's, yeah, there's a tremendous satisfaction in this craft, speaking for myself. The immediacy of the image, you can see it on the back. It's almost confirming reality. Sometimes I think pictures are better than reality. They arrest the moment and they get you, they allow you to examine it again and again. Deadlines being the worst, but then once that's satisfied, it's the best.
Well, I agree with Jeff on the worst, without question, office politics and editing. I'll be much more superficial than everybody else about what I enjoy. I'm working right now. I'm on the job. I don't have to get a pass from my boss and say, hey, can I go? I just say, you are treated like an adult, total grown-up, get your work done. Normally in the course of my job, I'm in a driving around in Montana looking at wolves or something. It's pretty damn cool, to be able to. The Times has sent me all over the world on their dime, That's pretty amazing. And the pretentious part is to say it's a privilege. It is. I was a national correspondent based in Denver, and no one expected to have their door knocked on and have a reporter from the LA Times come in. And it's amazing. These guys had to break down doors to get elected public officials to talk to them. And you go to someone's home in the middle of, Crib Death, Arkansas, and they, for some reason, open their door, come on in, sit down, you sit at their kitchen table, they give you some coffee, and they tell you these stories, and you just sit there and you say, my God, I love talking to people, I love hearing their stories, I like telling them. It's a pretty cool country, it's pretty cool to be able to describe it and explain it to people, and someone's paying me to do it. Now granted, we are paid crap, do not go into this business for that, but it's pretty amazing. So that's the part I like, that this is actually very dressy, we don't have to wear grown-up clothes. It's not 9 to 5 if you're a person who needs to be home for dinner, or every Tuesday you have a bridge game or whatever it is. No, that's never going to happen. And you can be sure you're going to break everybody's heart. You're working on weekends and you're working at night. But the payoff is pretty remarkable. Just the freedom and the autonomy. I really love that part of it.
So I will echo what a lot of other people have already said. I think that for me, the worst part is definitely office politics. Being far away and out on a story is the remedy to that, and that's the best part. Being able to go out and report and do what you love to do. It's a very independent, self-directed job. You're able to follow up on information, work on whatever you want. Within reason, communicating with your editor, of course, and follow it however you need to get that story. And one of the best feelings is being able to put things together and come out with the story that you were following up on, to stick to your guns and know that you were right at the end of the day, and you got what you needed out there.
Any other questions? I see in the way back.
PR.
I think I would always raise this to young journalists. Really stop and think about what you want to do. Be realistic about why you're getting into this profession, and then really just go all out and work hard. Really, that's what it comes down to. And then the rest will just, I think I've mentioned this earlier to someone, that it'll fall into place. That's as best as I can say.
I would say it's a really bizarre business. It's a business where the best reporters generally are not the people running newspapers. It's a business where trying to get hired somewhere will just drive you crazy. But I would just say, follow your dream, be inquisitive, and be curious.
Yeah, I found valuable, beginning of my career was reporting and photographing things that I liked personally. And I look back and they were simple things, but I did them well, and that became my portfolio. Your portfolio is really your ticket to the next bigger paper. You should maybe establish, if you're a video or visual journalist, a website. A website is now becoming your portfolio for an editor to have access to. So that would be it.
Yeah, every time I speak to a college class, a journalism class, and people quite understandably are their jobs, and I always say, nope, a lot of our colleagues are out of work, and they're very talented and have a lot of experience. There aren't any jobs. And I say all this stuff, and I get the stink eye from the professor who's been telling them, oh, there's all these jobs, and you can work on the internet, you can blog, and of course you're not going to get paid. But what I really love is someone comes up later and says, but I really want to do this. And after you say the reality of our profession, how difficult it is. I mean, it's difficult. The work is difficult. Everybody's yelling and screaming, and that's just in the office. Then you got to go out, and people aren't happy to see you, despite my little story about, opening the doors. Nobody wants to see these guys coming. Oh, no. So despite all of the things we can tell you, you're getting the worst pay. I'm calling public relations people who are 29 years old, and they're being paid a lot more than I am. And I just sit there and go, and they send out press releases that have poor grammar, et cetera, and it drives me nuts. Boo-hoo for me. This is what I chose. And if someone, after you tell them all this bad news, and they come up and they say, I want to do it anyway, and I say, you're exactly who we need in this business. Precisely. Please be a journalist, because they're going to doors are going to be slammed all the time. I want you to be the one who still stands on the door and says, excuse me, that's what we need. We don't need people who think it's a fun thing, what interesting person have you interviewed? And I mean, that's nice to know, but this has to be your passion, and then it's the greatest job in the world, bar none, as far as I'm concerned.
Russell Baker, who was a New York Times, Washington correspondent, and he was in London, and he was a wonderful, wonderful columnist, a very funny guy. He once said, the way they should teach people to be journalists is have you stand outside in the rain for 4 hours outside a closed meeting, wait till they come out, open the door and say no comment, and slam the door.
Nice.
Yeah, right.
I would say that I think it's really important to talk to journalists, to try and meet with them, get to know them, follow their work. So, I mean, in addition to networking, though, continue to pursue it no matter what. I mean, what Julie said, definitely spot on. What Jeff described, it's happened to me. I think that it's definitely not going to be easy to get a position, but if you work at it, and if you believe in and you continue to hone your skills and you believe in them, you'll get the position you need and you'll prove yourself. And I think that's the best, and your work will speak for itself.
That's actually a really good point, Tammy. This is a meritocracy. We are, certainly there are fair-haired men and women, and there's favorites and, all kinds of things, office politics, and you can be a total jerk, and often people are. If your work is good, you will be rewarded, with a job, with advancement. We all are laughing, saying, we know a lot of examples, but that's the beauty of this. It's not about anything else other than your ability to do something, and that's pretty unusual. And the other cool thing about working in a newsroom or in our setting is we are non-hierarchical. I call my boss by his first name. He is my boss. I let him think that, you know. It is as democratic and fair and open a place as you could possibly imagine, and that's pretty cool. You can be anybody. We've got people with all sorts of handicaps, and I don't mean that in a traditional way, and they're welcome. You know, it's just like, okay, fine. We had an operator. Remember the operator who had Tourette's? Do you know what Tourette's is? You spontaneously use foul language.
Like
Do you want?
Tourette's?
Yeah. Do you want that person answering the phone for a major metropolitan newspaper? Hello, but we thought it was pretty cool, so we kept her. So it's very accepting. It's just really about what you're. Can you do the work? And that's pretty cool. That's unusual, I think.
Question here.
You guys were talking about how your guys' jobs are very difficult, but as college students, I kind of want to know how you guys started, where you guys started, and how long it took for you guys to get you where you are right now.
Well, since I'm the senior member here, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never had a crummy day. I started out taking photography as an art major and found it to be way easier than drawing and sculpture. So it was a way to be absolutely accurate and subjective as well, because you can aim the camera and leave a lot of stuff out or leave a lot of stuff in. You can, back in the days in a dark room, you could make things look, better than reality. In my career, advanced in a very old-fashioned, traditional way, from my hometown weekly newspaper to a daily newspaper in the next town to the metropolitan paper in San Diego, and then on to the LA Times. So my sphere of influence went from around the city to now around the world. Most journalists, photojournalists, are now hired out of schools, four-year institutions, given to someone who has a powerful portfolio. There are small newspapers in our communities, not as many as when I began, where every town with 7,000 people seemed to have a newspaper and there was a place to get a toehold. But nowadays it's based on your education. Photojournalists don't necessarily have to be photojournalist majors. We have poli-sci majors, we have English majors, history majors. So it boils down to your book, your portfolio. That's how I started.
I want to hear this.
It all began. Where did you come from? Frequently asked. I've been very lucky. I always knew what I wanted to do, which is write and tell stories. And I don't come from a journalism family. We are a Southern family with very much of an oral tradition. So I always heard stories. I was interested in them. I asked a lot of questions, pestering, and my brothers and my mother will tell you all about what a pain in the neck I've always been and remain. But so for me, it was really simple. This is what I wanted to do. When I found out there was such a thing called journalism, I always read the paper, and I worked at my high school paper. I worked from there was a teen gazette. I mean, it was so embarrassing, but it was a different time. Just like Don said, there were more newspapers, there was more opportunity, and I would definitely encourage you to start there. This one, for example, coming to the Times, just thinking that why am I not at the New York Times in this instant? She's talented enough, but a lot of young folks think that it's beneath them to work at smaller papers. Better to make terrible mistakes at a smaller paper than be humiliated at a big paper and make a mistake. So I worked at small papers, and then I went to graduate school and came back, and I was in Phoenix, and there weren't really many jobs. I came to LA. Gidget goes to the big city, and there weren't any jobs. And I'd always worked what some people call the news side, editorial, but I became a sports writer because that was the only job available, and it was a period of time in the 80s when women were hired because it was quite apparent that there weren't women in sports, and we were being hired as tokens. And I was quite a big mouth about that sort of thing. That's ridiculous. I want to be hired for my ability. Oh no, when you're out of work, thank you, I'll be your token. I'd like to be African American, I'd like to be anything. I want the job. So I took the job, and I had the same snotty opinion about sports writing that pervades in newspapers, that it's the toy department. And people who say that have never really done that work. So I don't have problems with deadlines because next time you watch a baseball game, look at the clock. And let's say it's a New York team in Los Angeles, just know that New York writer has written 2 stories already for the day, for newspapers, for the earlier editions that just get thrown away. And then it's 10 o'clock, and I'm thinking, man, our poor Dodgers beat writer is really sweating it because the game's not over. Well, it's 1 o'clock in the morning in New York. So I'm a sports writer, which is just amazing training, and that got me at the Times, and then, I got in the Times maw, just churned my way up. But so 2 things. I would definitely look at the most accessible job you can get, take it and run and say thank you so much and just take the damn job, because there aren't any. And if it's a small paper, wonderful, because you have to do, in journalism school, I had a professor, and I'm sure everybody has the same thing, you'd be given some material and they'd say write a short news story. And he made us write the lead 10 different ways. And I thought, how many ways can you say the guy was shot in the head and blah. There are 10 different ways. And all of that training, all the stuff you do at a small paper, all the cops and all that stuff you do, it just pays death. You said, you've done it before, and you just, okay. So that's how I got started. I always knew what I wanted to do. It was never, a debate. I have 0 skills of any kind, none. So this is really, it's a good thing I found the one thing that I can even barely do. But yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay. I've been doing journalism since I was 13. I worked for my high school paper. We had a weekly paper. I'm going way back, but it's not too far back to go. I was editor-in-chief of that paper. I went to college at Berkeley. I worked for the Daily Cal. While I was there, every summer, I interned for different papers. So I interned for the Pasadena Star-News. I applied to be and was accepted as a Dow Jones Newspaper Fund intern. So they did it's a program where they give you business training for a week up in New York, and then they send you out to be a business reporter at various papers. So I worked for the Columbus Dispatch in Ohio. Best summer of my life. And a great experience. In fact, I was in touch with the Times back then, and the recruiter at that point, Randy Hagihara, he brought me over when I was first applying, really, really, really green. He brought me in for a little sit down. He's like, hey, yeah, I noticed your resume. We're watching you, but we just want you to have a little more marination, or I don't know what he used, but that was the idea. And I asked him, I was like, hey, well, that's great, that's fine. What advice do you have for me? You looked at my packet, what do you think? What can I do to make this better? And he's like, well, first of all, your clips don't have to be in chronological order. It's your best story first, your second best story second. Now looking back on that, I realized how green I was. It's rather funny to me, but he said when I spoke with him about this position in Ohio, he's like, well, how many people from California go and spend a summer in the Midwest? Don't you think that'd be a great experience? And I was like, yeah. And I went, and it really broadened my experience base. It wasn't something I would naturally think of, but I took that chance, and And from there, more opportunities sprung. I ended up going to work for the Wall Street Journal in their Paris office. I freelanced for them while I was studying abroad. Then I worked in their Paris office for the summer. Then I went to work for the Wall Street Journal in their Brussels bureau the following summer. And I had this position with the MetPro program, which is for like incoming. Initially, it was a minority editorial training program, but now it's essentially just a training program that they bring in new people and sort of test you out. We were the last batch to have like a competitive process where they determined where we'd end up out of all of Tribune's papers. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I had this position with them already secured while I was in Brussels, and one of the editors called me and said, "Hey, where are you working after you finish? Because you're graduating, right?" And you know, this editor with the journal was like, "Oh yeah, you think you'd be interested?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to the Times for this program." Like, okay, well, get your practice there and call us back. Get your training there and call us back. But I mean, I guess I mean, getting back to the question about how to make your way through the business, a lot of it's keeping in touch with people, getting those internships, making sure that you follow up, ask for advice. You're not going to always, I mean, often you're not going to get what you want. And as I was going through that whole thing, a lot of the people I spoke with, you know, couldn't offer me anything. But, you know, I went to work for the Times, and then I was there for a few years, ended up leaving to go work for an NGO in Iraq because I wanted to go work abroad. I was there for under a year. Then I did some freelance work for different agencies because I loved journalism. And while I was in Iraq, there were tons of stories, but I couldn't report them. And ended up freelancing, worked for the AP for a short while, and then came back to LA and ended up working for KPCC. And that's where I'm at.
Thanks. We're a little past our time, but Jeff and Ruben, I'd still like to hear your path.
You want to go? You go.
Okay. Tammy mentioned Randy Hagahara, who's a recruiter. Randy was an editor at the San Jose Mercury News when I worked there, who one time was sitting at his desk, all of a sudden turns around and looks at the newsroom and goes, "You're all a bunch of pukes," and then back to work. I didn't know that I wanted to didn't work on the high school paper, didn't work on the college paper. I was a sociology major in college, and so I tell people not to major in journalism as an undergrad, which will probably get me dirty looks from professors. When I got out of college and I was involved with a group which gave lectures on the JFK assassination, I was living in Boston, I realized one of the things I really missed about school was writing. And the people I was working with were a group of writers. And there were two very good alternative papers in Boston then, and there was the Village Voice in New York, and I would be reading the New York Times and the Boston Globe. And so I started freelancing. I wrote a piece for The Nation, and so I freelanced for a couple of years, and I was starving, eating tuna casserole without the tuna. And eventually, I went to Columbia for graduate school because I knew I wanted to be a journalist. And after I got out of Columbia, I worked for the Riverside Press Enterprise. Then I had a fellowship in Mexico. Then I worked for Sports Illustrated for a year on a special project. Freelanced some more for magazines, Mother Jones, Time, places, Village Voice. Worked for the LA Herald Examiner, which doesn't exist anymore, which was a very different kind of old-fashioned, pretty wild place. Then went to the San Jose Mercury News, which then was one of the better papers in the country. Now it's been sort of raped, and it's not particularly good, but it was very good then. And I worked there for almost 9 years, covering a variety of things. And I was an editor there for a couple years. Then I came to the Times, and I've been both an editor and a reporter at the Times. So.
All right. Well, man, I actually have no background in journalism as my colleagues and former colleague. I actually started delivering papers for these guys. I was a copy messenger at the Times. I was sort of wandering around trying to figure out what do I want to do with my life. I really don't know, and I couldn't find a profession that I thought stood out to me. And so while working at the Times as a copy messenger, basically fixing copy jams, sorting mail, delivering the paper, I started following, all the reporters who, at the time, Larry Stammer, Henry Weinstein, a lot of talented reporters who were there, and I just was reading their stuff, and I just thought, this is great, and this is cool. I don't know why I saw reporters like they were celebrities. I just thought, oh my, there's Steve Lopez, but then I wanted to do more. I wanted to get more involved. I started feeling that itch that I wanted to be part of what they were doing. And I was going to school at Cal State Fullerton, taking journalism classes, but it was just so slow. I hated the whole textbook thing. I wanted to be out there. I wanted to just send me out there and let me learn that way. Let me talk to people, interview them. And it was just more like textbook. Not to say that that's a bad thing, but I was just so eager and I was just anxious and I wanted to jump out and just start working in this profession. And then my mother got sick and I had to quit school and then continue working full time and sort of, try to keep a roof over our heads. And at the time, this was around 2004, and then the LA Times staff writers, Steve Hyman, Tracy Weber, and Charlie Ornstein started to investigate this hospital, Martin Luther King Jr. Hospital. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with that story, which eventually won a Pulitzer for public service. And basically, Tracy and Charlie had asked me, can you help us sort of translate? We're talking to a lot of, we want to talk to relatives of some of the victims who were either killed because of medical errors at the hospital, and they don't speak English, they speak Spanish only. I said, sure. And so sort of being there with them in the room and watching them work and interviewing them and asking the questions and just the way they handled it with compassion, with, respect, and just what they were trying to aim at in terms of their goal of trying to present the story to the public and sort of expose what was going on in this hospital. I just thought that was incredible. And then when the stories started running, and then the aftermath of that, the hospital closing down, and then getting politicians to finally, let's figure out how we can reform this hospital, I just thought that's amazing. I thought that's what I want to do. And so I asked the managing editor for the Metro section, and I said, hey, is there any way I can do more translations? Whatever you need, just let me know. And sure enough, Joe Leovi, one of our other staff writers, she had started this blog known as the Homicide Report, and she was obsessed with covering homicides in LA County, and she was about to go on a book leave, and so they asked me, why don't you take over? It's a simple who, what, when, and where sort of format, and it's easy for you to start on. And I did have a little journalism background in terms of the schooling that I did at Cal State Fullerton. And so I went at it for a year, covering murders and talking to relatives, and it was just me, my little digital camera, and the car, and just driving around and looking for murders. And I became Joe Leovi. I got obsessed. I would not sleep. I would stay up late in the night because I thought, did I just miss a murder? And I would check the wires from my phone, and then there were times where I just keep thinking of a family, and I just thought, maybe they'll talk now. And I just got very obsessed with covering it. And the idea was, for me, I had lost an uncle who had been killed. And so I kind of knew what the families were going through, and I guess I connected with that and felt very passionate about getting their stories out and letting them know that there's more to just a blurb that says, John John Joe died on this day, on this place, got stabbed, whatever. Could be more to that, it could be more to this person. Tell me about him. And I got obsessed with that. So I did that for a year, and then I guess I did a good job because they asked me to basically go into to work at the morning desk, covering just general assignment, updating the LA Now blog, and writing about car accidents, sand dune, just about every story there is out there in LA that that exist. And I did that also for a year, and that was a grueling shift. I mean, that was from 6 in the morning, and I'd stay sometimes till 6 p.m. and just constantly working, because you'd be updating the blog and then working on a story, a daily for that day. But then eventually they assigned me to cover the Southeast, and I started doing that, and I think I just passed away what you were asking me, which is that's how I got into this business. Basically, as I mentioned to the gentleman in the back, is hard work pays off. You gotta work hard. And again, to me, it was more like I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I finally figured it out what it was, and it was that idea of just putting together a good story, and then seeing what happens after that is the reward, and that is what brings me back to the newsroom day in and day out. And it's not for getting awards or anything like that. It's just mostly because that's what I love doing. And even at home, I get yelled at by my girlfriend because she's like, okay, you need to put the phone down. I'm like, but you don't understand. I gotta call people. And hard work will pay off, because that's how I got into this business. It's just working really hard and letting them know, like, I won't let you down. I'm gonna work my butt off and show you that I can do this. And you want how many quotes? 3? I'm gonna get you 10, and that's what I would do. And really, it pays off. Here we are, all of us. So.
Well, thank you all so very much for sharing your time, your thoughts, your insights, your stories, and that is the end of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.